Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the Indian forces in occupied Kashmir are staging a massacre similar to the Bosnian genocide. In a televised message marking 25 years of a Srebrenica massacre, Khan urged the international community to protect the people of Kashmir. The Prime Minister remembered the 8,000 Muslims who were killed by the Bosnian Serb forces in the UN-designated safe haven. He expressed grief over the incident, criticizing the international community's response towards it. Khan said, in a similar manner, 800,000 Indian troops have made 80,000 Kashmiris hostage in the occupied valley. He said the world must not let anything similar happen again and protect human rights across the globe. Pakistan's COVID-19 death toll has surpassed 5,100 with 65 more fatalities in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry said over 2,700 positive cases were reported overnight, bringing the total to over 246,000. It said more than 4,000 people recovered from the virus in the past day, raising the tally to over 153,000. The ministry said over 88,000 cases are active in the country. It said the province of Punjab reported the most new infections with nearly 2,000 cases. Sindh province reported more than 1,700 infections, while the capital Islamabad registered 147 new cases. In Brazil, the death toll from COVID-19 has exceeded 70,000 as over 1,200 fatalities were recorded in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, the US has once again reported its highest single-day infections as over 67,000 tested positive in the country. The total number of cases in the US has crossed 3.18 million with over 134,000 deaths. The global number of COVID-19 deaths has neared 560,000 with over 12.4 million cases. More in this report.
The virus is rigorously spreading in the Americas with each passing day. Mexico's death toll has risen by 665 to over 34,000 with a total of 289,000 infections. The government says the real number of infected people is likely to be significantly higher than the reported cases. Brazil remains the second worst affected country from the pandemic in the world after the United States. In a recent poll, nearly 2/3 of the Americans have disapproved of President Donald Trump's handling of the pandemic. U.S. top infectious disease official Dr. Anthony Fauci said the virus is likely to spread through the air to some degree.
We've learned painfully now that this is a highly efficient transmitter from person to person. By respiratory droplets, still some question about aerosol, but likely some degree of aerosol. Infected surfaces, it's been shown, can live for variable periods of time. Virus found in different body fluids, but the role in transmission is still unclear.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says it is unlikely that the new coronavirus will be eliminated.
In our current situation, it is very unlikely that we can eradicate or eliminate this virus. If we want to avoid, after lockdown, having major epidemics, we need to watch out for the small clusters, and we need to extinguish those clusters quickly. We all need to remain vigilant. We need to remain vigilant with our physical distancing, with our hygiene, with mask wearing in the appropriate settings.
Russia says it is considering to resume international flights after 15th July. Over in China, authorities have reported only 2 new coronavirus cases on the mainland. Meanwhile, South Korea has reported 35 more cases, with number of infections declining for the 4th consecutive day.
The UN Security Council has failed to find a consensus on prolonging cross-border aid to Syria after Russia and China vetoed another vote. Diplomats say the authorization for the transport of humanitarian aid to war torn Syria has expired amid the deadlock. The draft proposed humanitarian aid to be delivered through two border crossings into Syria from Turkey for the next 6 months. Diplomats said the remaining 13 council members voted in favor of the resolution. The council has been split, with most members against Syrian allies of Russia and China, who want to cut the number of border crossings to 1. The council has now unsuccessfully voted 4 times on the issue, while Russia and China have cast 2 vetoes this week. In Afghanistan, the government says the Taliban have killed 23 civilians and wounded 45 others over the past week. In a tweet, NSC spokesman Javed Faisal said the group carried out nearly 284 attacks in 16 provinces. The Taliban has not yet responded to the allegations. Earlier, the group say they have released another 17 Afghan security personnel as part of a prisoner swap under the Doha peace deal. A U.S. judge has ordered Iran to pay another $879 million over a 1996 bombing in Saudi Arabia that killed 19 U.S. airmen. The chief judge of the U.S. Federal District Court in Washington, Beryl Howell, ruled again that Tehran bore the responsibility of the attack. She wrote that Iran aided Hezbollah in carrying out the attack. Iran has denied its involvement and refused to pay, while President Donald Trump's administration hailed the judgment. In 2018, the same judge has ordered Iran to pay over $100 million in a similar case over the Khobar Towers bombing. Palestinian Fatah movement has dubbed Israel's annexation plan as a declaration of war that would change all rules of engagement. In an interview, Movement Secretary General Jibril al-Rajoub said Fatah and Hamas have abandoned the division. He said they are heading towards confronting the deal of the century and the annexation plan. Al-Rajoub said the Palestinian leadership wants to turn the Israeli threat into an opportunity to unite with the international community. Earlier, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to start annexing all the settlement blocks in occupied West Bank on July the 1st. But the move appears to have come to a halt amid widespread international refusal of the plan. North Korea has slammed the UK for announcing sanctions against two of its state organizations. In a statement, Foreign Ministry said the UK is emulating United States' hostile policy towards Pyongyang. It said Pyongyang rejects the UK's sanctions on the institutions responsible for the country's security. The Foreign Ministry warned that London will pay the price for its moves. The UK accuses the North Korean entities of involvement in forced labor in prison camps. The US has told its citizens to exercise caution in China amid increasing tensions between the two countries. The State Department said US citizens could face detentions and a ban from exiting the country. It did not say what prompted the security alert, but this comes as bilateral tensions intensify over issues ranging from the COVID-19 pandemic, trade, and the Hong Kong security law. Washington and Beijing recently exchanged visa bans against each other's officials. US President Donald Trump says Washington's relationship with China has been severely damaged due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Speaking to reporters on a flight to Florida, Trump said Beijing could have stopped the virus outbreak, but it didn't. The president also said he isn't thinking about a possible next stage of the US trade deal with China. The status of the trade agreement between the two superpowers has come under question amid the COVID-19 crisis. Meanwhile, a campaign rally for the Trump set for today in New Hampshire has been postponed because of a tropical storm off the East Coast. In South Africa, 5 people have been killed in a siege at a church in northwest of Pretoria. Police say they have detained 40 suspects in connection to the siege. It is not immediately clear whether those slain were hostages or attackers. But police said 4 people were found shot and burned to death in a car, while the 5th victim was also fatally shot. Authorities have ruled out the possibility of terrorist attack, saying the incident might have occurred due to a feud. Russia says the treaty on open skies will collapse if the US persuades its allies to pull out after its withdrawal. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said the US move to withdraw from the treaty is unjustified and its motives are unacceptable. In an interview, Ryabkov said the US is trying to put the blame for this decision on Russia is unscrupulous. He said the US is following a policy of maximum freedom from any restrictions in the arms control sector. After the US decision to withdraw from the Open Sky and the INF Treaty, New START is the only binding nuclear arms agreement between the two countries. The Netherlands says it will take Russia to the European Court of Human Rights over the 2014 downing of Malaysia Airlines flight over Ukraine. Nearly 300 people on board were killed when MH17 passenger jet was shot down by a missile allegedly fired from Russia. Nearly two-thirds of the 300 victims were Dutch. In a letter to the Parliament, Foreign Minister Step Blok said his government will give all information on MH17 to the court. After years of collecting evidence, a Dutch-led investigation team said the missile came from a Russian army base. The 4 suspects, 3 Russians and 1 Ukrainian, are said to have arranged the missile system. Despite the case, the Dutch government said it wants to continue talks with Russia on MH17. The change in the status of Istanbul's Hagia Sophia Museum has got a strong reaction from around the world. This comes after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan decreed to convert the landmark into a mosque after a court ruling. The United Nations agency, UNESCO, has urged Istanbul to immediately open a dialogue to preserve the monument's status as a World Heritage Site. The agency said the World Heritage Committee will hold a review of the building during its next session. Meanwhile, the US and the EU have also expressed disappointment and regret at changing the status of the landmark. Neighboring Greece said the offensive decision will harm Istanbul's relations with Athens and Brussels. Elsewhere, Cyprus and the Russian Orthodox Church deemed the move as historical appropriation. Turkey says it has killed 8 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in an airstrike during Operation Claw Tiger in northern Iraq. The National Defense Ministry said military operations backed by air power were carried out in the Haftanin region. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy terrorists' weapon caches and shelters. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. State media said PKK militants often use northern Iraq to plan cross-border terrorist attacks in Turkey. Turkey holds the militants responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. More stories to follow, but right after a short break, stay tuned. Welcome back. Today marks the 25th anniversary of Srebrenica massacre, when Bosnian Serb forces killed over 8,000 Muslims in the UN-designated safe haven. Years later, mass graves of Bosnian men and boys are still discovered in the area, and the pain and suffering continue. This report has the details.
The Srebrenica massacre in July 1995 during the Bosnian War was Europe's worst atrocity since World War II. The Bosnian War broke out in April 1992, and by early 1993, Muslims were flocking to the town of Srebrenica, one of 6 UN-declared safe areas. On 9th July 1995, President Radovan Karadzic ordered to conquer Srebrenica, and Serb soldiers took 30 Dutch peacekeepers hostage. Upon the fall of the town of Srebrenica, Serb General Ratko Mladic only let women, children and the elderly go, much to the concern of the UN.
The second major problem is the whereabouts of the men. This is a group mostly composed of women, elderly and children. We have reports, but we cannot confirm that there may be thousands of them in Bratunac. We have been asking for access. We have not been given access. We have international staff. But evidently the whereabouts, the fate, and the non-access to many men, thousands of men, is also a matter of deep concern.
About 15,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys tried to flee Srebrenica overnight, but Serb troops ambushed and killed about 8,000 of them. Serbs used bulldozers to throw the bodies in numerous mass graves, while thousands of women and girls were raped. Amid growing international pressure, The Hague indicted Karadzic and Mladic in 1995, and they were arrested about 15 years later. Both leaders were convicted for the genocide and war crimes of the 44-month Serb aggression.
Grants Judges de Prada and Rosa Descending the prosecution's 4th ground of appeal, dismisses Judges de Prada Descending the prosecution's appeal in all other respects, sets aside Judges de Prada and Rosa Descending the sentence of 40 years of imprisonment, and imposes Judge de Prada and Rosa Descending a sentence of life imprisonment
Mladic, dubbed the Butcher of Bosnia, was convicted on 2 counts of genocide and 5 counts of crimes against humanity.
In Serbia, thousands of people protest for a 4th consecutive night against President Alexander Vučić for mishandling a COVID-19 pandemic. Police fired tear gas to push back the protesters from entering the parliament in central Belgrade. Protesters stormed the parliament, throwing bottles, rocks and flares at the police and removing metal fences. Police said several people were arrested, while many reporters were injured in the clashes. This week, protesters were initially rallied against economically stifling measures to contain the pandemic, but demonstrators soon turned anti-government, demanding Vučić's resignation. Serbia's President Alexander Vučić says he is hopeful for a peace deal between its country and Kosovo. Speaking in an interview after a video conference, he said efforts by Germany and France to restart talks are paying off. Vučić said he wants to find a way to reconcile Serbs, Kosovars and Albanians still scarred by the wars of 1990s. Regarding a possible peace deal, the president said he doesn't care if it happens in a month or in 2 years. In a statement, Berlin said discussions between Vučić and Kosovo's Prime Minister Abdullah Houthi will resume on Sunday via video conference. Kosovo declared independence from Serbia in 1999, which Belgrade does not recognize. Hong Kong's opposition camp set up polling booths across the city for primary elections. The polls are aimed at selecting democracy candidates who stand the best chance of success in legislative council elections in September. The election is only for the opposition camp. The primaries come less than 2 weeks after Beijing imposed sweeping national security legislation on the Asian financial hub. Prominent pro-democracy figure Joshua Wong, who is one of the candidates in the primary election, urged residents to vote. It seeks to bolster the chance for democracy candidates to achieve a 35+ majority in the 70-seat legislature in polls on September. Singapore's ruling People's Action Party has retained power in the general election, but with a reduced majority. The returning officer announced PAP won 83 of the 93 parliamentary seats. The Opposition Workers' Party secured 10 seats. The PAP has got just over 61% of the votes compared to nearly 70% in the last election in 2015. In a press conference, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said the votes percentage was not as high as he had expected. He said the result still reflects broad-based support for PAP. In Nepal, the death toll from flash floods and landslides triggered by heavy rainfall has risen to 40. The country's Met Department says the current spell of monsoon rains will last for another 3 days. Officials say 20 people have been killed and 13 others are missing in Miyagi district. The Home Ministry says 7 people, including 3 children, lost their lives due to landslides in the Kaski district. Another 7 were killed in Jajarkot district in far west, while 6 people were killed in central Nepal. Naryani and other major rivers in the country have swollen due to the continuous downpour for the last 48 hours. Algeria has expressed keenness on resolving the Libyan crisis through dialogue and maintaining the integrity of the country's territory. In an interview, Foreign Minister Sabri Bokoudom said Algeria expects the return of stability as soon as possible to Libya. He said his country maintains good relations with all Libyan sides, keeping an equal footing with all in terms of legality. Bokoudom warned that Libya's division will be a danger for everyone, specifically for the neighboring countries. The foreign minister added that Algeria is also cooperating with Tunisia and Egypt to exchange views regarding Libya. In Mali, a protester was killed after the demonstrations became violent, forcing the state broadcaster to go off-air in the capital Bamako. Police fired shots and used tear gas to disperse the demonstrators who were trying to break into the National Assembly. This is the third rally in a month demanding President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta to stand down. There is discontent over the long-running militant conflict, an economic crisis, and disputed legislative elections. Leaders of the protests have called on supporters to occupy buildings at the start of a civil disobedience campaign aimed at forcing Keïta to resign. The violence is a growing concern for Mali and its neighbors to not further destabilize the region as it faces militant insurgency. Ethiopia's Attorney General says 2 arrested suspects have confessed to killing a popular singer from the Oromo ethnic group. In a statement, Abebe said the killing was part of a plot to topple Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government. She said the assassination was meant to be a cover to take power from the incumbent by force. The Attorney General added the government has identified a 3rd suspect who is still at large. She said unarmed agitators are calling for more protests and road blockades in the coming days. Singer Hachulu Hundessa death sparked days of protest and ethnic violence that killed 239 people. The UN has called for a fairer economic systems and availability of COVID-19 vaccine to everyone, everywhere. Speaking at a virtual conference, UN Chief Antonio Guterres said the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic should be based on economic and social justice. Guterres said the pandemic has disrupted global supply chains for treatments for other diseases, including AIDS. The UN chief said a future cure against the coronavirus should be a people's vaccine.
The COVID-19 crisis is a wake-up call. Economies and societies must be reshaped to be fairer and more inclusive. Effective treatment and the future vaccine against the coronavirus must be available to everyone, everywhere, as a global public good, a people's vaccine. Above all, we need a recovery based on economic and social justice.
Now, the US has welcomed the World Health Organization's probe into the origins of new coronavirus in China. This comes after an advanced team from the WHO arrived in China to launch an investigation into the origins of COVID-19. In an interview, US envoy to the UN, Andrew Broomberg, said the investigation is a necessary step to understand how the virus spread throughout the world. He said the US expects that China's authorities will offer the team of scientists full access to data, samples, and localities. The WHO said the team will lay the groundwork for a wider mission aimed at identifying how the virus jumped from animals to humans. The US has been criticizing the global health body and withdrew its funding, accusing it of not doing enough to question Beijing's actions at the start of the crisis. US President Donald Trump says he will sign an executive order on immigration in the next few weeks with a road to citizenship for migrants. In an interview, Trump said the measure will involve deferred action for childhood arrivals, commonly referred to as DACA. DACA protects hundreds of thousands of immigrants who are in the US illegally but arrived in the country as children. This comes after the US Supreme Court blocked Trump's bid to end DACA earlier last month, which was created by President Barack Obama. The court ruling has not been able to prevent Trump from trying again to end the program, as he plans to sign the order into law in the coming weeks.
At the Supreme Court ruling, they gave the president tremendous powers when they said that you could take in this case, 700,000 or so people. Right. So they gave powers. Based on the powers that they gave, I'm going to be doing an immigration bill. One of the aspects of the bill that you'll be very happy with and that a lot of people will be, including me and a lot of Republicans, by the way, will be DACA. We'll give them a road to citizenship.
When is this going to be
I would
done?
say over the next 4 weeks.
A pair of twin giant pandas has celebrated their first birthday at a research academy in China's northwest Jiangxi province. What special arrangements were made for the celebration? Let's take a look at this report.
The youngest in 28 pandas, Jia Jia and Wan Wan, are the second pair of twins at the kindling research space. Jia Jia, who is slightly bigger, is a male panda, and Wan Wan is a female. Milk is still their main daily meals, because they are still in the stage of growing permanent teeth. Apart from milk, the breeders let them eat fresh and tender bamboo leaves, helping them get familiar with crude fiber food after weaning. A special cake filled with watermelons, apples, carrots, and bamboo leaves gave the twins a good appetite.
We prepared some apples, carrots, and thin bamboos. Let them try to eat a little first, mainly familiarizing them with these foods. Newborn Jia Jia weighed 122 grams and Yan Yuan weighed 170 grams. Now both of their weights reached 40 kilograms.
The growth indexes of the two giant pandas are normal so far. They are now equivalent to 3-year-old human beings, being very active.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Iran says it is determined to develop its oil industry despite the U.S. sanctions imposed on the country. In a televised speech, Oil Minister Bijan Zanganeh said Tehran will not surrender under any circumstances. Zanganeh said Iran will increase its production capacity so that it can enter the market and revive its share. Tehran's crude production has halved to around 2 million barrels per day after Washington reimposed sanctions. Iran's oil exports are currently estimated at 100 to 200,000 barrels per day, down from more than 2.5 million barrels that Iran shipped in April 2018. UAE's Emirates airline president Tim Clark says the Middle Eastern carrier is set to cut as many as 9,000 jobs because of the coronavirus pandemic. It is the first time the world's biggest long-haul carrier has disclosed how many jobs will be slashed. In an interview, Clark said the airline has already cut a tenth of its staff, but will have to let go of a few more. He also said that Emirates was not as badly affected as other airlines. But Clark said the airline was heading for one of its best years ever before the pandemic. The global airline industry has been severely impacted by coronavirus, with activity all but grinding to a halt. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. With the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.